Today we're going to be unboxing, setting up, and reviewing the Brook Vivid controller for Nintendo Switch and mobile phone. It's storming outside, so I'm going to speak up. Jerry, we got 14 categories we're going to be judging this controller on to find out if it is a good value for you, the average consumer, the true gamer. Let's get it.
This is your controller captain. We've reached 6,900 feet. Go ahead and start flicking the sticks and mollywopping the back paddles.
You don't like back paddles? How about those rear buttons? We've tested almost 100 custom and premium controllers, and we're only at the beginning. You need a thumbstick guide or tutorial on how to overclock your controller? Check out the controller playlist. Bing bong.
Controller captain out.
So as for the packaging and included accessories, you are going to have this bright, vibrant teal box over here displaying what platforms this controller is for. It is going to be Nintendo Switch, both platforms of mobile, so Android and iOS, Apple devices, and of course PC, because you can plug in a Motorola pager or a baked potato, and there's probably going to be driver support for that. You have this little slide out, and then you are going to have a gray inner packaging. Pulling the plastic shell out, you are going to have a mount or clip for your cell phone, which is a very nice included accessory. And you are going to have a very short, what appears to be 3-foot USB-C cable. It is not braided or microfiber, it is just rubberized. Not very flexible and lightweight, but it will get the job done for charging your controller. If you are going to be playing with it wired via PC, I would recommend using a slightly larger USB-C cable, but as it is not proprietary, just a standard USB-C cable, you can use your own. As for the features and unique quirks of this controller, it is relatively small in comparison to standard Nintendo Switch controllers, and definitely in comparison to something like an Xbox One or PlayStation 4 or 5 controller. Now, it will fit most average hands quite good, and we are going to talk about that more in the ergonomics section of this video when I actually put this thing on a scale and do some measurements with a soft measuring tape. Now, this does pair up with a Nintendo Switch console that includes the light and the OLED as normal, so you will be able to wake up your console from sleep mode, as well as have 4 of these paired at a time. And in that aspect or regard, it has all the standard features of a Switch Pro controller, such as 6-axis motion sensing and built-in vibration. Now, this does have a 600 milliamp battery, which will get you a little over 10 hours of play off of 3 hours of charge, which is good. This does also have turbo function that you can remap to any of the buttons, so instead of having to constantly spam a button, you can hold it down. And it does have 3 different settings, being 5, 10, and 15 inputs per second while holding down the button. Now, in competitive use, this would indeed be cheating in something like a tournament. However, for casual play, playing Smash Bros on the couch, or playing a offline single-player story mode, turbo function is nice to have. Now, on the back, it does have a slider with macro and shoot labeled. When you are on macro, you can record either the AL or AR button, which are the 2 rear buttons, to perform a macro, meaning 1 to 25 button presses or inputs, all by pressing one of these rear buttons. Again, a feature that is acceptable in single player use, however not so much in competitive multiplayer. And when you are in shooting mode, by holding down the AR button or the right rear button, it will decrease the sensitivity of the right stick, so if you're trying to snipe or do some finite precise movements, you can with the right analog stick while holding down AR. You can also adjust the vibration feature on the fly from 0, 50, 70, or 100%, and you can program or remap these rear buttons to be any of the face buttons or D-pad. So instead of setting it as a macro, you will just set it as one of those buttons. So if you're playing first-person shooters on your Switch, for example, the BioShock or Borderlands trilogies, you can keep your fingers on the thumbsticks, aiming and walking, while still hitting the face or action buttons. As for weight, I'm getting 189 grams on the scale, which equates to 6.7 ounces. Now, as for measurements at its widest point, which is going to be around the hand grips, it is 5 3/4 inch, with a grip spacing of around 13 inches, each grip being 5 3/4 inch around, and the manufacturer's dimensions are on screen here. As for real-world ergonomics, this does feel incredibly comfortable. I have average-sized hands, but I'm 5'11", have relatively long, skinny fingers, and this fits very nicely in my hand. But I think it would also work pretty well for small-handed gamers as well. Large-handed individuals, you might want to look elsewhere. Now, my biggest complaint about the ergonomics is that this shell is incredibly slick. Not only does it not have any kind of rubberized material on the back, but it also doesn't have any kind of etched in design into the plastic, like some stippling or pattern etched into the rear shell, and it is incredibly slick. Now, as for fit and finish, the plastics do feel relatively cheap and chintzy. Again, this is a $35 controller, so I kind of expected this level of fit and finish on the hand, but it doesn't feel undurable. Trying to do the flex test, bending the shell back and forth, I don't hear any creaks or moans and groans, nothing's crumpling in my hand. And as for a quality control reputation, there simply isn't one, positive or negative, because Brooks is generally generally known for their adapters. I have showcased some of their adapters on this channel, and they're fantastic. They let you use controllers from a different platform, such as Xbox controllers on PlayStation, PlayStation controllers on Nintendo Switch, virtually any modern controller on a retro console like an NES or SNES. But this is their first entry into the controller market, and as such, there is no reputation, positive or negative, for them being reliable. And if you do have any issues, there is a 1-year warranty on all Brook's products. That includes their adapters and, of course, this new controller. As for D-pad, face buttons, action buttons, basically everything on the front of the controller minus the thumbsticks, the D-pad does feel pretty mushy in my opinion, and you don't get a satisfying activation of diagonal inputs. I do greatly like the face buttons though. They are very easy to hit. You get a nice resistance, a nice satisfying tactile click to let you know that you did activate it. They're not mechanical, they are a membrane switch, so they have a rubber plunger mechanism under there, as most controllers do, at least most standard controllers. But they do feel very good. They are relatively small and closely spaced together, but that is pretty par for the course with Nintendo Switch controllers. Once you put on the phone attachment, you will feel it a little bit in your middle fingers if you have relatively longer hands. It does have rubberized pads on the bottom and top to keep your phone in place, and it does adjust for larger or smaller phones. As for the included thumbsticks, you do get a pretty darn hefty resistance. It's very reminiscent of something like the Xbox 360 controller. More resistance than you get out of a standard Nintendo Switch Pro controller, and I do genuinely like that. As for the rubber material or compound that they're using on the included thumbstick caps, which there is no swappable caps here, so you're going to be using these stalkers. It does feel good, but not amazing. It doesn't provide the highest amount of grip, and I would recommend using some kind of aftermarket, such as Control Freaks. There is no compatibility listed on the Control Freaks website for this controller, as it is, well, not even out yet.
It is now available for public purchase. I've had this controller for almost 2 months, but Brooks didn't want the review going live until the controller was actually for sale.
But it does have very similar thumbstick dimensions to the standard Switch Pro controller.
As for licensed Control Freaks thumbstick cap, I have the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One and Series, and PlayStation 4 and 5 caps here. We're gonna find out what, if anything, works on these Brook thumbsticks. The Switch ones, loose and wiggly, spinning and grinning. The white ones for PlayStation 4 and 5, loosey-goosey, won't even stay on there. Look at that. The black ones for Xbox. Up, up. Hey, take a little bit of confidence to push on, and they do still ever so slightly rotate, but these are the winners here. So if you're trying to put Control Freaks on here, go for the Xbox One/Series versions, and they do work pretty good, actually. Or if you're trying to save some money by not going name brand, or you just don't like Control Freaks.
My recommendation is to use some kind of a generic slip-on cap like these over here. These are universal and work with any thumbstick, and that will give you a little bit more grip and also a little bit more height on these sticks, which is important if you are playing shooters with this. As for the neutral position, breaking away from the dead zone, it does have a very nice, accurate feeling.
Over here on Gamepad Tester, it is reflecting that there is virtually no stick drift out of the box. We're getting about a 0.0002 on each axis, the vertical and horizontal, which is not bad at all. Oh, I'm not a huge fan of that whatsoever. There is a huge dead zone in the triggers, where the first eighth of an inch or so does absolutely nothing, and then it instantly jumps up to about 0.3. But that definitely does reflect what I was feeling with the triggers feeling a bit sloppy and mushy. You do have a pretty substantial dead zone before anything is actually registered. Let's measure the circularity and see how accurate these thumbsticks are. 13.2, 14.5. Let's run another one. Got a 12.5 on each. Run one more. All right, 11.6, 12.1. Now, that might not seem very good. However, for Nintendo Switch controllers, that actually is relatively good, above the norm. Generally, with Switch Pro controllers, you're looking at around 20%. What average error is the accuracy of the thumbstick. So in these red zones, and even in the purple a little bit here, which I like to see is blue, in the red, it means it is not properly reading your inputs, but overall, not bad results at all. In fact, I would say relatively good for a Switch controller.
As for triggers and bumpers, the bumpers are in a very nice ergonomic position and do have a nice satisfying click. You can press them on the sides or on the top. It does feel like they're on a bit of a hinge or swivel mechanism, but they do actuate quickly and accurately. As for the triggers, I am not a huge fan, not only in the plastics that they use, but also the actual feel, because instead of an on-off switch, like most standard Switch controllers, they went with somewhat of a linear pull, and it does feel pretty squishy and sloppy, and on the left trigger, I'm actually getting a bit of a squishy rubber sound. Listen to this. That sounds pretty mushy to me. And for a Nintendo Switch, which already doesn't support linear triggers that give you a varying squeeze, it's basically just 0 or 100 on or off, I feel like they could have made triggers with a much, much shorter pull. As for the rear buttons or paddles, this controller does have two rear buttons that are in a very nice ergonomic position. Where you want to naturally hold your hand, you are going to be able to depress both of the rear buttons with the ball of your finger here. You can also curl your fingers and use the tips of your fingers. And they do give you a nice satisfying click, however they do feel a little bit mushy as well. but definitely serviceable and comfortable.
Now, there are two methods for connecting this controller to PC. First one is going to be wired via USB-C cable. I am using my own. As I mentioned, the included cable is very short. Now, once you plug it in, it will instantly roar to life and have drivers installed. These blinking LED lights indicate the battery life. They will all become illuminated and then go solid when the controller is at 100% battery life. You can also Bluetooth this to your PC. There are two different methods of getting this into pairing mode. One is called X input and one is called D input, and it doesn't explain in the instruction manual what the difference is or what situation or platform you want to use each with. So we're just going to try each and see which works. The first one we'll try is the X input. You're going to press the home button in the center as well as A, and it will flash purple when it is in pairing mode. Then you're going to go into the Bluetooth discovery of your PC, which should be down here in the toolbar. You are going to click on add a Bluetooth or other device. This first one up here that says mice, keyboards, pins, etc. You might think, oh, everything else because it says Xbox controllers. Just trust me. Click on this Xbox wireless controller. It's going to connect. Ooh, that scared me. It vibrated on my desk. 2 drops of urine came out, but it is now paired. As you can see, the purple LED lights are solid, and it is indicating that I am connected. So let's measure the polling rate / refresh rate, i.e. the input delay of this controller in both Bluetooth and wired via the USB-C cable. Must be on low battery. It keeps shutting itself off. I'm going to go ahead and charge it. So we're going to go ahead and measure the refresh rate / polling rate, i.e. the input lag or delay on this controller. We are going to launch X input, and this is currently connected via a USB-C cable. We're also going to get these measurements via Bluetooth as well. So moving the left analog stick around, see some 3s in there, some 7s. I saw 1 double digit. So we're getting an average of 6.4 milliseconds, 3 on the low end, 51 on the high. We're going to go ahead and run it again. Okay, an average 6.7, an average 6.8. Relatively consistent as well, with a minimum of 1.5 and a maximum of 19.8. And it is showing 150 hertz polling rate. We're now going to overclock this controller. I do have a separate guide or tutorial walking you through how to overclock virtually any controller and then measure the polling rate to make sure it actually took effect. This is labeled as an Xbox 360 controller for Windows, not being filtered. Default polling rate for an estimated 4 to 8 milliseconds of input lag or delay, which is exactly what we're seeing right around the 6 to 7 mark. Let's overclock. Okay, unplug, replug, and we are now overclocked. So now we're down to 5.7 milliseconds. Let's run another one. 5.4. 5.4. So this did benefit slightly from being overclocked, reducing the input delay by about 2 milliseconds on average.
To connect to the Nintendo Switch from the home screen, go to Controllers, then go to Change Grip / Order. Hold down the pairing button on the top of the controller for around 3 seconds. All of the LED lights will illuminate. Then press both of the triggers. You will feel a vibration in the controller, and it will say that you are now paired.
All of the controls, such as setting macros or remapping the rear buttons, setting the vibration strength, or turning turbo function on and off is very simple. It is all controlled from these buttons on the front and a combination of button presses. Keep in mind when you have the slider in shoot mode, that will slow down the right analog stick's aiming whenever you are holding down AR or the right button, and whenever you have it in macro, it doesn't necessarily have to be macros where it is multiple inputs. It could just be one rear button. So as for the pros and cons of the Brook Vivid controller, we're going to start with the cons because there is less of them. First of all, the battery life was subpar. It wasn't terrible. I'm not going to bash it or dock any points. However, the battery life is not great. I was getting an average of 7.5 hours of use time, and that is a combination of standby time where it is standing by for me to pick up and turn on, and then also active gameplay time. I've charged it 3 times since I've owned it, and it did seem to get a full charge in about 2.5 to 3 hours, so that's good. The next cons, the plastics do feel just slightly cheap. However, that is virtually every Nintendo Switch controller I have tested, no matter what the price point. Take that with a grain of salt. The included USB-C cable is too short if you're planning on playing with this wired on PC. Granted, I think very few people are actually going to use this as a wired PC controller because the options are so vast for what you can use on a PC. Most people that buy this controller are going to use it either on Nintendo Switch or for mobile phone use, which for mobile phone use, I have to say this controller was actually pretty good. Next con, there's no 3.5mm headphone jack in the bottom, so no wired headset support. That's actually most Switch controllers. And the 2 biggest cons of the Brook Vivid, in my opinion, are going to be the surface or texture. It is just incredibly slippery, so I would recommend opting for some kind of a aftermarket rubberized stick-on pad on Amazon, some grip tape or something you can stick on there, because it's slick as snot. And the next one is going to be the feeling of the triggers. It is incredibly mushy. It just feels a little bit sloppy, which there's virtually no excuse for in a Switch controller, because the Switch does not not support linear trigger squeezes. The triggers on most Nintendo Switch controllers are like a mouse click. It is literally on or off. It is a button, not a squeeze. So the fact that these have such a long, mushy squeeze is doesn't make any sense because the Switch is just registering either on or off. As for the pros, well, this is my favorite color, so the fact that they offer it in this colorway is pretty cool. But from a more practical performance standpoint, the rear buttons are actually pretty good. I did wish that there was 4. There were several times I was craving an extra 2 buttons, but hey, for 2 buttons, they are very ergonomic. You can remap them on the fly. You can bind them to either single button or up to 25 macro presses. It's cool that this does have turbo function and you can adjust the vibration, 2 features that I personally don't mess with, but it's great that they have those. Ergonomically, the controller is comfortable shape and size wise. However, again, it is very slippery as I mentioned. The thumbsticks are actually somewhat serviceable, even with an average error of about 10%. That's actually above average or relatively good for Nintendo Switch controllers. Also, the rubber or silicone that they used on these thumbsticks feels pretty good. Do wish they were slightly higher, but that will be remedied by throwing on some control freaks. But what's the verdict? Is this actually a good value for $40? Well, let's look at this subjectively. A licensed Nintendo Switch controller is currently $70 on Amazon. The Brook Vivid over here is $40. This does everything that the licensed Switch Pro controller does, plus a couple of things like remappable rear buttons, turbo function, macros, built-in support for the vibration motors. So in comparison to the licensed Switch Pro controller, absolutely a good value. But what about other third-party aftermarket options out there, such as other Switch controllers I've tested on this channel, such as the Big One, or NYXI, or PowerA? Well, in comparison to a lot of those third-party aftermarket options, I actually wasn't a tremendous fan of the Brook Vivid, and that was a combination of the slick plastics and also the sloppy trigger feel. Also, the subpar battery life didn't help. And while I do not by any means think this is a bad controller, and in fact, subjectively, it's a good controller, I do think there are better options out there, such as the NYXI controller I tested recently, which had rubberized grips and a more premium feel, and was in a very similar, almost identical price point. If you're looking for an extra Switch Pro controller, or maybe it's going to be your primary, your daily driver, this is linked in the description below, and I'll see you next time with another controller video. Peace. If you enjoyed the video, liking it helps it to get seen by more gamers. This information will reach and assist them as well, which in turn helps me grow this little channel, which I do greatly appreciate. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover news in the gaming community and industry, tutorials helping you get set up streaming and YouTubing, as well as honest gaming product reviews, keyboards, mice, headsets, controllers, mics, chairs, etc. There are some hefty exclusive discount codes found only in the description of my videos and only for the audience here at Gamer Heaven. Check out Into the AM for some of the sickest looking and most comfortable cloth to ever grace my gaming giblets. If you don't want to be scorching your corneas with harmful blue light, check out Gamer Advantage, the only blue light glasses on the market that look sexy and actually work. If you're looking for a custom controller that'll blow the competition's tits back, AIM definitively has the best bang for buck or price to performance when it comes to Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch controllers. Nope, they don't do Switch, but they do gaming mice. I said doo-doo. I have links to all my other platforms and socials in the description below. If you need a quick laugh or blast of gamer adrenaline, check my short form videos out at TikTok. To get in touch with myself and the Stallions and Stallionettes of Gamer Heaven, join the community Discord, and check me out at twitch.tv where I go live every other leap year on a blue moon if it falls into an odd calendar number, and my pH balance is on point. Just kidding, starting June I'm going to be live streaming a lot. Thanks for watching. This has been AK40 Kevin hosting Gamer Heaven, and I'll see you tomorrow because I upload daily, all the time, 60% of the time, sometimes, most of the time. Peace.